Would the audience please rise? We'd like to welcome family, friends, and loved ones for the funeral services of Sister Beverly Gail Peck Brunski. My name is Bishop Brett Clayson, and I'll be conducting today. We've just had a family prayer by Joe Brunski, her son. We'd like to thank those that are conducting our music today. On the piano, we have Sister Lori Von Lem, and as our chorister, Nora K. Burnett. Our opening song will be There Is Sunshine in My Soul Today, 227, following which our invocation will be by Kathy Hathaway, who is a cousin. We'll go to that point.
Our Father in heaven, we come humbly before thee in this memorial service for Beverly Gale Brunski, or Peck Brunski. We're grateful for the life she led, for the beautiful example she was, and for all the wonderful things she's accomplished in her life. We're grateful, Father, for thy blessings, for the knowledge of the plan of salvation, and for all the wonderful things that thou hast given us. I say these things in the name of thy beloved Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Our program will go as follows. Our life sketch will be done by Alyssa Dawn Melik Lloyd, a granddaughter, following which we'll have a musical number, I Am a Child of God, by the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and they'll be accompanied by Sister Lori Von Lem. Following which we'll have a speaker, Joseph Matthew Brunski, a son, and also Bishop Charles Melik III, a grandson. Charles Alvin Melik III, sorry, I got the wrong one, I'm sorry, grandson. After which we'll have a musical number, Together Forever, by Michael McLean and Charles Alvin Melik III, a grandson, will perform that for us. Our closing remarks will be by Bishop Chuck Melik, a son-in-law. We'll go to that point. Thank you.
Beverly Gale Peck Brunski, age 86, died Friday, July 8, 2022, in Pleasant Grove, Utah, of causes incident to old age. Bev was born on May 11, 1936, in Salt Lake City, Utah, to Thelma Lucille Davis and Rodney Peck, the third child of 7. She spent most of her childhood in Salt Lake City with a short stint in Pioche, Nevada, and graduated from South High School in Salt Lake City in 1954. After high school, Bev attended both the University of Utah and Brigham Young University in 1961. Bev graduated with her Bachelor's of Science degree in nursing from Brigham Young University. Throughout her life, she worked at different hospitals in various states, including Utah, Nevada, Arizona, and Colorado. During Bev's nursing career were years working in the burn unit, the psych unit, as a visiting nurse, and she finished her career in the Well Baby Nursery. Bev married Raymond John Brunski on June 16, 1958, in Ely, Nevada. Bev and Ray went on a blind date when Ray was stationed at Hill Air Force Base in Utah. They had 3 children and raised their family in Utah, Nevada, Arizona, and Colorado. Raymond died on June 9, 1996, just shy of their 38th wedding anniversary. Bev was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and served in various callings all her life. Since she moved around quite a bit in her early married life, it seemed that she was destined to teach primary age boys forever. She must have had invisible ink on her forehead that said, "Blazer teacher," that only bishops could read. Bev also served as a Relief Society president, a librarian in several church buildings, and as a missionary in the mission office of the Colorado Denver North Mission. In addition to church calling, she started book clubs as she was a voracious reader, which was called to be a quilting chairman, even though she had never quilted, but quickly learned, was incredibly compassionate and had shoulders that everybody could cry on, sewed, knitted, and crocheted for pleasure in various humanitarian projects, and taught her daughters to do the same, gave great hugs, and traveled on her own after her husband died. Bev is survived by her children, Rayanne Brunski Melik, spouse Chuck, of Pleasant Grove, Utah, Becky Brunski of La Mesa, California, and Joseph Brunski of La Canada, California. Bev and Ray have 3 grandchildren, Crystal Dawn Melik, deceased, Charles Alvin Melik III, Cam, with spouse Melanie, and Alyssa Dawn Melik Lloyd, spouse McKay. 8 great-grandchildren, Drew Madison Melik, Charles Alvin Melik IV, Charlie, Spencer A. Melik, Owen J. Melik, and Grant Brady Melik, Oakley Dunn Lloyd, Rayleigh K. Lloyd, and Hazley May Lloyd, plus 2 honorary grandchildren, Joe Kubicek, spouse Ben, and Annie Solorio. The Brunski Mielek Lloyd families would like to thank the wonderful caregivers at Alpine Valley Care Center in Pleasant Grove, Utah, who took such great care of our mom. They demonstrated Christ-like love for Bev, and for that we are truly grateful for their kindness and compassion.
Good morning, brothers and sisters. Thank you for coming out and celebrating the life of my mother. I was tasked to come up with a good story, something that kind of tells you about my mother's life and her selflessness, and of course, got a gazillion stories. If you know my mom, she's done some crazy things. I kind of searched through some things and thought, well, I can start out maybe with the one where I think she was in her late 60s or early 70s, ended up driving a 36-foot moving van to help a blind lady move across the country. Thought about that, but then I come up with a better one. Nobody knew this, I don't think. Very few people knew, but my mom was a closet Alice Cooper fan. Not of his music, of course. we grew up partially in Arizona in the early 70s, and that was when Alice was starting his career. And my mom always, Alice, he's the devil. And we kind of grew up that way, and of course not really listening to his music or anything like that, but I ended up in Arizona, and I ended up meeting Alice Cooper and his family, and we became friends. And through the years, I talked to my mom about it, and she was still, he's the devil and this and that. And so I told Alice and his wife one time when we were having lunch, I said, I gotta get you to meet my mom. And it took us about 8 years to get schedules to match. My mom used to come visit when I was in Arizona, in Phoenix. And so just happened to be that schedules matched on there. So when she was at my house visiting for a month or so, then I said, Mom, we've got to go visit a friend of mine. We're going to go have some dinner. So we went to another friend's Italian restaurant and met up with Alice and his wife Cheryl. And I'll never forget those two meeting, because they fast became friends, and it was just amazing to see the change of heart of my mom. We kind of joke, or I still joke that he needs to get a haircut, a shave, but that's his image. But my mom always looked past that and could always see the good in people, and that was just an amazing moment. I ended up getting a picture of that. It's kind of a family joke because she spread a picture of me at one time to a bunch of Relief Society friends, and so I ended up taking a picture of my mom with Alice and his wife Cheryl at the restaurant. And so I ended up, this was way back when we had the ward directories on paper, so I ended up sending a copy of that picture to 20 of her Relief Society friends just to shake things up a little bit on there, and she very much enjoyed that. Like I said, she couldn't stand his music, but so that was just, like I said, the kind of thing that my mom did. She saw the good in everybody. She was always willing to help out anybody. I'm sure she's helped out people in this room. She's helped out me many times. That was just the way she was. She lived an excellent life. Did lots of good. Was a great nurse. Well, except to me. She always told me to take a couple aspirin and see her in the morning. And maybe 3 days later she'd, oh yeah, you did break your collarbone. Yeah, thanks, Mom. But so I'd just like to say thank you to everybody that's helped her out in the past couple of years. She's had some setbacks. She was trying to break the family record of broken bones, and I think she's pretty darn close at this point. It was kind of a struggle, but she lived a full life, and she passed away peacefully. I'd like to say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
It's good to be here with everybody. Thank you for coming here and celebrating our grandmother's life. I compiled a bunch of stories that I wanted to kind of condense, and just remembrances that I had of my grandma, and I had some props that I brought, but I forgot that they were going to go in the casket with her, and so anyway, I feel like I don't have everything I specifically need. But one of the things that was a really big remembrance of mine when we would go visit Grandma is that we would have these chip parties. And Grandma was good about taking us. She would always take us to the store when we got there, and we would do this chip party, and we would go pick out our favorite type of chips, and it was usually the big bag, which was always awesome because as little kids we're like, you mean a whole bag of Doritos? And we would do that multiple times, whether we were visiting her in her home in Denver area, or if she came to visit. That was just what we did with Grandma. And so I brought a Dorito bag. It's nestled safely in there with her, as it should be. And but that was a fun thing that I remember doing as a kid. And so really, anytime I see a bag of Doritos, it takes me back just to Grandma. I don't know if that's a good thing or what, but it feels right, So, but a couple other things. I had my kids tell me a few things too that they remember about Grandma, and I wanted to share those with you as well. Some of the things that they remember: that she was a very loveful person, that Charlie said, and she let them play with her jewelry every time my kids came over to, most of the time that they had with Grandma was when she was living with my mom and dad. So it was always fun to go into her room, and the kids she had jewelry. Grandma always had jewelry around, and they would put the jewelry on, and they loved dressing up, and she would, be excited for what they were wearing and different things like that. They also said she gave good hugs and kisses, which is very true. That was something that she, we never left without hugs and kisses, and she would always say that on the phone to us. I did like to give her I always called it a monkey bite, but I'd kiss her neck, and she'd just squirm and laugh and chuckle to herself, and that was always fun. So I tried to leave her with those anytime that I could. We always liked to bring her food, and I don't know if you guys did this too, Liz, but oftentimes Grandma had a soft spot for McDonald's fries and diet caffeine-free Coke, which I don't know how she ever found those, because they're hard to find, but she was always able to find them. And anytime we were in town, we would go get her that, and we'd just say, Grandma, anything you need? She'd be like, if you could, just run down there to McDonald's and grab me some fries and a Coke, and so we were more than happy to provide her with that. It's the simple pleasures, right, in life. But she loved to have the grandkids around, and a big thing towards maybe the last several years, she really liked peanut butter and pickle sandwiches, and that was a fun thing. If you don't think it's a good combo, I encourage you to try it, because it's pretty good. It's pretty good. I just realized all these are about food. That's embarrassing. But anyway, our family motto was always, "We're Mealix, we eat." So anyway, I think it fits. But a couple other stories I just wanted to share. When Liz and I would go over and visit Grandma, there were certain things that we just enjoyed doing every time, and there were certain toys that were there every time that there were no other grandkids, so they were not, nobody was vying to take these toys, but a couple of the little toys we enjoyed was a little spirograph, if any of you guys have ever done those, but that was always there, and we don't ever know where it came from. Maybe somebody in here knows, but it was always there. And we always played, and there was always a dartboard, a little Velcro dartboard that we would position all over the house and play with, and those are just some good remembrances of that. Another fun story that we had was visiting if we ever visited during the New Year, we would. Grandma was always good for staying up late, so we enjoyed that. And with her, we would stay up till the New Year, and one year we started banging pots and pans. She just had them all in the house, and we just grabbed them and started screaming and yelling and hitting these pots and pans. The neighbors were probably thinking we're nuts, but it was a good time. Another good thing to remember. as a kid, I remember growing up and exploring in her garage. There were things for days, and I don't think any of those were Grandma's. I think they were all Grandpa's in his garage, and he collected things, many things. Some might have said hoarding on occasions, but it was always fun to explore Grandma's garage. And as I'm thinking back on all these stories, I remember doing a lot of these, but kind of on our own. And so I don't know if Grandma was there with us doing all these activities, or we just kind of just like, hey, good to be at Grandma's, go play, and we would. She would of course take us different places and stuff, and she did spoil us rotten, which was a lot of fun. But I remember doing a lot of exploring in the garage, and probably one of the most important things for me with Grandma was she was a really great listener, and she was always good for some sort of discussion, and in my experience, it was always without judgment, and I really appreciated that. And I remember specifically one time I was really had a hard time with work. There were some things going on there, and so I thought that I should call her, and she just listened, and I got frustrated and shared my experiences, and then I cried, and then some other things, and she just listened and didn't ever tell me what I needed to think or believe or anything like that. She just listened and said, "Oh, that must be pretty hard," and I appreciated that from her. So she was always good to talk to. Some of my best memories of her will always be, just little moments where maybe I got to just sit with her and hold her hand and chat. She always appreciated that and wanted to be close to us, and even with the distance when we could, we enjoyed being around her. She frequently told us stories of our older sister, Crystal. We didn't know her really when we were young, and it was always neat to get to know her a little bit through Grandma's stories. And I know that she was there, I'm sure, welcoming her there. She was always big into, it was always fun to talk to her about her nursing experiences, as my Uncle Joe talked about. She was a really great nurse and did that for a long time, very headstrong. And she always told me the secret to telling people about, to responding about a baby, if they're cute or not, right? Because, I guess there are cute babies and not cute babies, whether we don't want to admit it or not, but she would say, if it was cute, she would say, "Oh, it's a cute baby." Right? And if it wasn't cute, she'd say, "It just looks just like you," right? The parents or whoever. And so, to my knowledge, she said that our babies were cute every time, but we just had a baby 2 days ago, and I know Grandma would have liked to have seen him, so, but who knows? I think she probably would have told him he was cute too, 'cause he's a good little guy. But I like to think she probably had a hand in him getting here. Yeah, we're gonna miss her. It was good. We're really grateful for how she was able to transfer here to living here locally. I know the care center took really good care of her, and we were really grateful for that. And we're going to miss her, but we know she's in a better place. And it was good. This isn't a sad time. I think for the majority of us, we're happy that she's. I know, just sitting with her the last few weeks, I got to see her a couple times, and she mentioned Grandpa's name a lot, during that time. And I know that they, I'm sure, had a great reunion or whatever, and I think that there was, I can't help but think that she knew maybe some other things were going on at that time. So anyway, grateful for her, love her, and we'll keep her memories close. And she always really loved when I played the piano. Liz and I grew up playing the piano, and so just wanted to share a song. It's called "Together Forever" by Michael McLean. And I'm going to stumble through that a little bit and hopefully just send her off in the right way. So I'll just share that with you now.
Well, Bev was anything but a traditional mother-in-law. You know, most son-in-laws do not like their mother-in-law. But she and I had this bond. In fact, a lot of times she said she liked me better than Rayanne, and I think that was true. I think because Rayanne reminded her a lot of her dad, and I just love my mother-in-law. She was a great woman, and I'm honored to be able to spend a few minutes sharing with her a few thoughts about her. I met Bev 44 years ago when Rayanne and I were at BYU. My freshman year at school, she came and picked Rayanne up at the end of the year, and it was the first chance I had to meet her, and immediately she's so kind, she was so accepting that I knew that it was going to be okay being in that family someday, and it's been great to have her. I always found her to be accepting and kind and an advocate for me, and I really appreciated that. One of the struggles that I had, however, was I never knew what to call her. I don't know that Rayanne and I've ever talked about this, but it just felt weird to call her mom because I had my own mom, and that just felt weird, right? And so over time we called her grandma and Grammy Great and all kind of things, and it was a hard thing, and I'll tell you a little bit later about how I resolved that. But what I wanted to share with you is just a few foundations of her life, some pillars of her life that I thought were so indicative of the type of woman that she was. You've already heard she was not your normal grandma. She was not your normal mom. She was different, and in a good way, right? Very, very different. So the first pillar that I'd like to share with you about her is her education. She grew up, as I think Alyssa read, in Salt Lake City, and I don't think her home life was great. I don't mean to offend Jim sitting back there, but I think it was chaotic, and life was a little hectic, and I think she found that she wanted a way out. She wanted a way to kind of establish herself and get out of the simple lifestyle that she'd had. Her education was everything to her, and she talked about it all the time. In fact, some of you may have seen a little blanket out here from her nursing years and those type of things. It was really important, her education. And I asked her once why, and she said, I felt like I was always the grown-up in my family, and I was the one that had to go forth and do things. And she was a great beacon to all of her siblings and to her kids and grandkids, which I think is absolutely true. It took her 7 years to get her degree. Now that sounds like a long time, but she was working full-time, going to school. She was going to BYU, working in Salt Lake. She said that the only time she really got to sleep was on the bus from BYU to Salt Lake. And she said, thankfully, the bus driver knew who she was and what her stop was, and when they'd get there, he'd wake her up so that she could get off at her stop. I think her husband thought when they got married that all of a sudden education was now going to be ended. Now she was now the wife. Well, that didn't happen. Immediately, I think it was basically on their honeymoon that she said, I'm going back to school, and she did. And then Rayanne was born a year later, and I think he thought again, this is it. This is the end. Nope. He had to bring his parents out to watch Rayanne for the first 2 years of her life so that she could finish her education because it was that important to her. She worked for 42 years, I think Rayanne said, as a nurse, and I think she loved that profession. She said from the time she was little, she always wanted to be a nurse. That was her vocation, what she really wanted. Along with education as a pillar of her life, and this probably ties in, she was a book nut. She loved books. And I can't tell you how many times we've moved her books from place to place, to home, and we still have a garage full of them right now. She loved her books. She loved her bookcases. They were like a representation of a life well lived, and they were like personal friends to her. I go to the library regularly, but I don't feel that way about my books, but she loved her books. It was actually part of her. A second pillar of her life, I'd say, is just family. Like, she loved her family. She met her husband on a blind date. They had a bit of an unusual relationship. Is that fair to say? But it worked for them. I think somehow they worked out and they had a good life together. She was a dedicated mom. I think she was a family disciplinarian. I think she was the one that controlled things around the house. She wasn't afraid to wash somebody's mouth out if they said something inappropriate. That was not hard for her to do. What I admired her is after her husband died, she actually had a backup plan. She knew that that was not the end of her life. She had many, many more years to live. And so as soon as he passed away, she moved on to the next stage of her life. And that was awesome. She had, I think, a very, very special bond with her grandkids. And Crystal first, and then Cam when he came along, and then Alyssa was just amazing to her, and always something special about Alyssa and their relationship. And I think maybe because we had to work harder to get her here than the other kids. And she loved her grandkids. They were everything to her. And just as much as she loved her grandkids, she loved her great-grandkids, right? That was so fun when they came along. And just as Cam was saying, when we would see her in our house, and she'd have just all the little grandkids huddled around, and she was in this little tiny room with no space, but they would just huddle around her and watch TV and play with jewelry, and they knew that they were a special time in their life, that they would have her. And I'm grateful that we had her to live with us for the last 3 years, because it was really a blessing. Another thing that you should know about Bev, if you don't know her very well, is she was probably the most compassionate woman that I ever knew. And I love that about her. She cared about everybody. She especially cared about the lonely, the forgotten, and those that might not have someone to be friends with. She was the epitome of a minister in the church. She was always taking care of somebody. And what's interesting is I don't think she ever made a cookie in her lifetime, or at least not that I remember in 44 years. So she was not that cookie baking grandma. That's why the chips were so important to Cam and Alyssa. But she was always willing to sit with those that might have a particular need, just to sit down. She served for many years as a librarian, and I think people just come in and hug her and just enjoy being in her presence. The one act of compassion that I'll share with you that was probably most important to me was when our daughter Crystal died. She approached Rayanne and I, and she said, would it be okay if I dressed her body? And that was just impossible. Rayanne and I couldn't even imagine our little 3-year-old trying to dress her. But Bev did that, and she said it was one of the most sweetest experiences of her life, that she was able to go and put her little dress on and have just some quiet time. She wasn't afraid of death. That wasn't something that scared her. But I loved that she cared for my little girl when I just couldn't do it. It was just too hard. She was very service-oriented. Rayanne and others have shared how important service was to her. particularly after her husband died, she was able to serve in church callings and that she'd never had before. She was probably, I don't know, in her 60s when she was called as a Relief Society president, and that was a shock. Like, all her life she'd been raised, her husband was not a member of the church, and so it was very hard for her to have callings other than her blazer calling, which she had for most years. But she served as Relief Society president. She never put a tablecloth on a table. She never brought a cookie to anybody. But if you needed something, she'd bring a pizza to your house that she'd go and buy and bring it over there. She always took care of others around her. And she also had an opportunity to serve as a missionary in the Denver North Mission in the mission office. And she only did that, I think, because she wanted to be a good example for her grandkids. That was so important for her that they knew about her testimony and how important that was. The last thing I'll share about her from a personality standpoint is she was unconventional. And you already get that from all the things I've said. I remember one time she came to our house and she was so excited. She was going to cook a meal for me. And I knew that this was disaster because this was not her forte. It was not cooking. So she cooked up this big roast, and I was so excited. I was going to have roast. I went, opened it up, and it was roast beef. Not roast beef. It was corned beef. She didn't even know the difference between a roast and corned beef. And I hate corned beef, and so it was disaster. But that was so typical of her. She didn't really care. She just did the best that she could. Joe talked about her driving the blind lady to, I think, Missouri or someplace. Like, she drove across country with her. She also kind of disliked perfection in people. Isn't that weird? Like, she liked people that were a little odd, right? So someone that, if you're short or fat or, no hair, it didn't matter. Like, she liked everybody, which was really amazing. She hated to use words that were not proper words. So when she died, we were not to say that she passed away or she'd gone fishing or all the little euphemisms that tend to be used in the world today. She said, I died, and that seems appropriate for her, that she understood that. She loved Asian TV the last few years. We don't know where that came from, but she was always watching some show from Korea, and I don't get it. She said she liked their eyes. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. But my very favorite story of all, and I'll end with this before I share my testimony, is when her mother died. So for the last year of Bev's mom's life, for the last 10 years of her life, she lived with Bev in Denver. And when she passed away, I think she was in her early 90s, 90 or 91, something like that, 92. When she passed away, I was traveling at that time, and I had work in Chicago. And I found out that, Grandma had died, and so I called my mother-in-law, and I was coming back from Chicago, and she said, well, I'm going to drive her body back to Utah, where she's going to be buried. And I'm like, drive her back here? You don't do that. And she said, oh, yeah, I've got a blazer. I can make that happen, right? I've got a Jimmy, I think it was, right? And so I said, okay, here's what I'll do is I'll get off on my flight home. I'll get off the airplane in Denver, and I'll drive back with you. Well, this happened to be in October. And we went to the funeral home, and then they bring out this big box with Grandma's body in it. It was just a cardboard box. I didn't know how that kind of thing happened. They shoved it in the back of her little blazer, and off we headed. It was the most hysterical trip of my life. I did not know what to expect, and we had more fun on that trip. There would be things like, if we got a little snack or something, we'd say, Grandma, do you want a cookie? And we'd try all kind of things to involve her in our experience along there. What's interesting is that was October, and if any of you have driven through Wyoming in October, the end of October, it always gets cold, and there's always a huge snowstorm. And literally, as we're driving, I can't remember exactly the area, Laramie or something like that, like literally there was a snowstorm so bad that trucks were jackknifed all over the place. And we're like, what do we do? Like, where do we go? What do we do? So they closed down the Highway 80, and so we went and stayed in a hotel that night, and then we had to figure out, what do we do with Grandma? Do we take her with us? Do we leave her in the car? So we just put some blankets on her and figured she was fine, right? And we went inside and had a good night, and then in the morning we were able to return. But it was so hysterical to me, and I'll share this last thing. This is really sad, but when we got back, she said, well, I haven't seen Grandma yet, so I'd like to see her before when we dropped her off at the mortuary in Salt Lake City. And so she got out and she came back in the car. I'm not big on dead people, so it wasn't something that I really wanted to go see. And she said she's in a big Ziploc bag. I had no idea that they hauled her in a Ziploc bag inside of this big carton, but it worked. It was so funny. But again, I think that's very typical of my mother-in-law. She loved those kind of things. She had a great testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ. She taught that mostly through her actions and the service that she did. I think all of us at this time, those of us that understand the gospel of Jesus Christ, know how important the plan of salvation is in challenging times when we can really understand that this is not the end of our life, that there's much more. President Gordon B. Hinckley said, "Death is not final, though it seems so when the dark shroud overshadows mortal life. To those who accept Christ in his eternal missions, there is light and comfort. There is assurance. There is certainty." I love that. Lance Wickham, a member of the Quorum of the 12, said, "Grief is the natural byproduct of love. One cannot selflessly love another and not grieve in their suffering or eventual death. The only way to avoid grief would be to not experience love, and it is love that gives life richness and meaning." And then last, and I think this is very appropriate, President Nelson, before he was prophet of the church, he said, "We can't fully appreciate joyful reunions without tearful separations now. The only way to take sorrow out of death is to take love out of life." And we don't want that to happen. Right before Bev died, I had an opportunity to go over to the nursing home and to give her a blessing. And Joe and Becky and Rayanne were there as we gave her a blessing. And as I left, it was interesting. I went up to her and I took her hand and I told her goodbye. And that was probably the first time that I really felt comfortable calling her mom. Because at that time I knew that she's the only mom that I've had for a lot of years now on this earth. And I loved her like a mother. I loved her. And I think everybody that knew Bev felt that way. So grateful for my experience with her. So grateful for my testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ and how helpful it is at these times. And grateful for all of you being here today and honoring her. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
I'd like to thank all the speakers and those that have performed musical numbers today. Our closing song will be How Great Thou Art, hymn number 86, following which our benediction will be by James Peck, her brother, after which we'll invite the pallbearers to join us up towards the front, and we'll exit out this door. Thank you.
Our eternal Heavenly Father, we come before Thee at this time to give Thee thanks, to be able to attend this service, that we might be able to share our experiences with Beverly in this mortal life. We're thankful for the love that has been shared here this morning. And we ask Thee to strengthen that love between all of us. We ask Thee to strengthen our faith in Thee, that we might resolve to live the gospel more fully, to push ourselves just a little more to do what's right. And these things we ask in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
We invite the pallbearers to come forward, if the audience may stand. We would like to thank everyone who joined us today, and you may be excused. Thank you.